Good afternoon. My name is Jim Conlan, and welcome to the latest edition of our entertainment show, where we look at upcoming TV series and movies debuting here in Ireland and the UK this month. And up next on our selection now is a TV series, an animated TV series. It's coming to our screens and all our mobile platforms on Netflix, the channel Netflix UK, on July the 23rd. It's called Masters of the Universe Revelation. As we all know about the character He-Man and the fight for the Eternia with Skeletor, we're delighted to be joined by one of the animated voiceover artists who voices the role of Hero in Masters of the Universe Revelation, the one and only Phil LaMarr. Phil.
Hi there.
Great to have you today, Phil. I suppose, Phil, you're a renowned, done so much body of work in terms of voiceovers, in terms of acting, in terms of TV series, as such. What makes voiceovers special to you or relevant to you to take on a certain voiceover project? Does it have to meet certain criteria?
No, well, it's funny, Jim, that you asked that because that's sort of like what my mother thinks. Like, why don't you pick one of those big movies like Eddie Murphy? Most people don't realize actors get picked. We generally don't pick. But I've been really, really fortunate over the years to get picked by some really talented creators like Kevin Smith doing great projects like Masters of the Universe. So, it's not all of them are this good. We all have a few clunkers on our resume, but every once in a while you get something this fun with a cast this talented. So, and that's always a joy.
And Phil, you mentioned the cast, and you just look down there, the names just jump off the page as well. Chris Wood, Sarah Michelle Gellar, Mark Hamill, to mention a few as well. So obviously no expense wasn't spared in terms of making this a real top-notch animated series. And we all know the sort of the quest, that sort of superheroes sort of type, that He-Man, that sort of battle. We all remember the cartoons when we were growing up as sort of such. So to get to play a character on that sort of TV series, the likes of Hero, what was your anticipations? Did you want to see drawings, first of all, to give a representation of what the character looked like, to maybe enhance what sort of a voice or what sort of tone that you wanted to give him?
Well, unfortunately, these days, everything is so secretive. They don't give you drawings. They don't give you full scripts. So I'm as excited as everyone else to see the series, to see what the characters look like, to find out how the episode I voiced ends, because, with the internet, they email something to you, somebody else picks it up, and before we know it, it's all over the world. So they're especially with something like He-Man, which has such a huge, dedicated fan base, people will try to hack somebody's email to get a picture of He-Man. So I was basically just trusting in Kevin and the script. It's like, what do you need me to do? Guide me. And also in animation, we do the voices long before most of the drawings are done.
Okay.
So, there's not as much to see as one would like. But the thing is, we put in our piece, then the artists put in their piece, and then it all gets put together. And have you seen the trailer?
I have seen a tiny bit of the trailer, and I have to say the animation and the graphics are sort of mind blowing in terms
Right?
of terms of what has been done. You mentioned the Hero, and I suppose Hero sort of backstory in terms of the He-Man sort of universe as well. It sort of reveled, it's sort of sketchy in sort of some areas, and then we sort of see he's sort of more and more sort of revealed about him. So in terms of the direction, in terms of reading that sort of synopsis of Hero, what was you sort of drawn to in terms of the character that you wanted maybe to display those certain attributes in terms of voicing that sort of voice?
Well, that's the interesting thing about the He-Man universe is there are so many different threads over the years, and Hero in particular is an example of that because there are a few different versions of the character.
Yeah.
And I can't spoil anything about this version, but it's interesting because in something like this, and I had a similar experience working on Transformers, where you have the toy line storyline, you have the animated series storyline, comic books, or just things that were, put out at McDonald's in the 60s or 70s. I don't know, whatever. So there are a lot of different versions, and doing your research on a character, you're like, Kevin, which guy am I? It's like, don't worry about it. Here's what you're doing. And, and we are doing our version. And as you saw from the trailer, Kevin and the animators have done such an amazing job. It's basically this version of He-Man looks and feels like people remember it from when they used to watch it on TV as tiny children.
Yeah.
Because, when you watch something when you're little, it always, is so much better and more beautiful and more exciting. Then, when you're 40, you go back and watch it, you're like, oh, that's not as good as I remember. This one is as good as everybody remembers it.
And
it's the memory come to life.
And I suppose, Phil, in terms of that, you speak about memories. I just noticed there that you obviously are involved in another iconic franchise, and you played a new character in that sort of franchise as well. The Mortal Kombat sort of franchise, you were played Kotal Khan in the classic blockbuster video game. And we know Mortal Kombat in terms of it's big again, a massive movie sort of film again. Right. So in terms of, say, that example where you're producing a character in what was an animated movie, because let's face it, that video game, if you take all the scenes, it's like 3.5 hours of an animated movie. Is that sort of easier in one sense than portraying a role like a Hero, where there's bits of here and there, and there's a bit of a backstory, and there's bits of versions, while something like Kotal Khan, you're the first spice of that character, so you can do it. You're the first anticipation of it. You're the first. So when people look back or future, then look back in previous incarnations, you're that first incarnation. Is that easier in one sense?
It is. Well, I mean, it's simpler. Not necessarily easier, because the trick is to make that character come to life and really pop. And the thing is, when you take over a character, the character is already popped. People already love it. So in one sense, that part is easier, but you're also having to live up to someone else's performance. And when you're creating a character, it's simpler because it's you and the writer. And how do we make this? Let's go. And you use your own talents and their script, and you don't have to look to the side or worry about anything else. Whereas when you're, taking over a character that someone else has done, you sort of have to be conscious of what they did, even if you're not doing an imitation, you still want to be true to the sense of that character. You can't take it in a completely different direction. So, they both have pros and cons, but yes, you're right. Creating an original character is a little simpler.
And I suppose, Phil, when you see the animated project come to life, and you're saying you're excited like everyone else to watch the sort of finished project, do you look at it at one sense in terms of how the lining or how the voice of your representation comes across in that sort of scene? Are you almost like studying it in terms of, how it's sort of in terms of the bigger sort of picture, or do you sort of relax like a fan and sort of sit back and enjoy the project? Can you switch off basically when you're watching a character that you've created, especially on an animated version where basically you have no control of the visual effects of that character?
Well, absolutely, Jim. It's funny because, as I said before, the voices are done so far ahead of the animation that when you're finally watching the finished product, there's a lot you haven't experienced. And it's very different from on-camera work, where you were there on set. You saw what everyone else was doing. And it's a little harder watching finished on-camera work to remove yourself and just watch it as a fan. With animation, there's so much that's new to you, even as a performer, that it's easier to sit back and just take in the world.
And do you see animation work like in terms of theatre or theatrical sort of, in terms of where you're sort of pitching that sort of a voice in terms of to try and draw in an audience? You almost feel that you're in front of a sort of a stage in terms of that you're trying to get across that sort of image in terms of that voice that you're trying to pitch?
Well, it's interesting because building a character in animation is a collaborative effort. You've got the writer, who is an idea that they've put on paper. You've got a director, you've got animators who have visual ideas, and so we're all working together. I always like to say that as a voice actor, I am at most a third of whatever character you love, because without the drawing and certainly without the writing, who's just gonna listen to somebody's voice saying nothing in particular? That's not interesting. But when we all work together, that's how the character comes to life. And like you said, so the audience, it's actually interesting because creating a character in animation isn't like performing for an audience. It's like working together with a team. All right, what's our plan? What if I do something like this? Well, no, because actually we're going to make him about 20 feet tall. Oh, okay, so that won't work. So he's got to be so. And so you go back and forth, helping each other build the piece that's going to, work best.
It's interesting, Phil, you mentioned about the sort of production and in terms of an animated project. I remember speaking to Joel McHale recently, and he did an animated sort of a voiceover project, and such an ensemble cast. And I said, he must have had great interaction. And lo and behold, he said he had never actually met one of the other voiceovers, never bumped into them coming out the studio. They were all scheduled in different sort of times. And he did most of his voice within a 1 week. So it came to him as a surprise when he actually found out who else was on this show. It sort of rocked him. Is that a sort of a similar experience? Is that the sort of norm somehow that sometimes you get an animated project that you don't know who your sort of co-stars may be, in fact?
Well, certainly during pandemic, everyone was pretty much recorded separately. But in general, over the last, I'd say, 10 years, more and more animated projects have been recording actors separately, which is really a lot less fun for us. I mean, when I first started working on shows like Justice League and Futurama, we would record together as an ensemble, all in the same room. And I mean, the only downside was when one of your co-stars did something hilarious and you burst out laughing and ruined the take. To me, that was the only problem. But I don't know why they've decided it's better for them to record actors separately. But as actors, it definitely helps to be able to hear the other actors. And I think you discover moments and create things when you're there together that you can't just write. You can't just type something. When, somebody else does something in a room next to you, it can trigger a different response. But we're not in charge, so we don't get to decide how it's done.
And I suppose, Phil, in terms of this year, in terms of 2021 and maybe late into the fall, I suppose everything is beginning to come back towards normal as such. Have you any other sort of projects in the pipeline in terms of TV series, movies, animated work that we're going to see hit on our screens maybe later on in the year or maybe the start of 2022?
Yes, there's a lot of things happening. Of course, with animation, it's what did I do a year ago? Because that's what's about to come out. Although last year I got to work on the new version of Spitting Image, And I'm hoping to be able to do some more of that in the near future, because that was a lot of fun. Nothing better than that puppet satire.
And I suppose, Phil, if I can turn it over to your character now, Hero, for the
Mhm.
last 30 seconds, and maybe you can give us your best animated version of Hero. He might enlighten all our audience of all ages, young and old, whether it's grandparents sitting down with their young toddlers, parents trying to put their young ones to bed, or tell them the fanatical sort of story of the He-Man universe, what they'll grow up. What's in store for them on July the 23rd? Why they should tune in to Channel Netflix UK, and to reveal what Masters of the Universe Revelation has in store for people of all ages.
On July 23rd, you will come to Eternia, and we'll find out who the real hero is, because inside we are all heroes, Adam. By the power of Grayskull!
On that note, Phil LaMarr, an absolute pleasure talking to you today, as we joyful wait in joyful anticipation for the premiere of Masters of the Universe Revelation here in Ireland. It's coming out on Channel Netflix UK, July the 23rd. Obviously, Phil LaMarr is going to play a very, very important role in it, as his representation of Hero. No doubt you've recognized the voice many times in the past. We're delighted to be able to show the face behind the voice as well here this evening as well. So, Phil, an absolute pleasure. We wish you and your loved ones all the best for the remainder of the year, and hopefully we'll get to speak to you sometime again in the near future with more iconic projects in the works for you. But for the moment, Phil LaMarr, take care and God bless.
Thank you so much for having me, Jim, and enjoy Masters of the Universe Revelations!